Londonderry will be the site for the next community visit facilitated by the Vermont Council on Rural Development, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the progress of Vermont's rural communities. The first session of what will be a series of 3 community meetups will take place on Wednesday, February 3rd, from 6 to 9 p.m. Unlike previous community visits the Council on Rural Development has done, this one will be a virtual one, on Zoom. The purpose is to identify opportunities and challenges and to connect with various resources to address those identified. Topics for the meetup on February 3rd include economic development, jobs and village center, youth, families and childcare, housing and transportation, and recreation, health and wellness. Jenna Koloski, the Community and Policy Manager for the Vermont Council on Rural Development, tells us more about the visit.
So February 3rd will serve as the first in a 3-step process of public meetings that will go through a process with the community to collect ideas, like brainstorm any ideas for the future of the town, to then in step 2, select priorities for the community. And then in step 3 will be all about action planning. So now that we've chosen our priorities, facilitated conversations to get to what are the first steps we take, and also then connecting the community to financial and technical resources. So this first event on February 3rd is all about that brainstorming phase. So we're going to the community to say, what are all your ideas for the future of Londonderry and what could be in the community? And so the way the schedule will work is we'll come all together at 6 p.m. for an opening session. We'll introduce the process and also introduce a visiting team of top state, federal, business, and nonprofit leaders and experts that are there to listen and to sit in and to hear what's going on in Londonderry and share some reflection towards the end. But we'll do that opening session, and then we'll break out into topics that were selected by a steering committee of community members. So folks from all different parts of Londonderry came together to say, what's important to discuss is economic development, jobs and village centers, youth, families and childcare, housing and transportation, and then recreation, health and wellness. So we'll come together, people will have an opportunity to choose between 2 of those topics at a time, come back, break out again, and then we'll just come back for a closing session. So we'll collect all those ideas that people share to consolidate into a list of ideas to bring back to the community. At the same time, folks are also filling out surveys that are available online, as well as at different locations around town. So there's all kinds of different ways to share input and ideas for Londonderry.
And how did Londonderry happen to be selected? Did the select board reach out to you folks and plant the idea, or was there some other process in play?
Yeah, so for I think several years now, there's been a process in Londonderry called Project Londonderry. It's a group of residents who have been really interested in doing a very similar thing, selecting priorities for the future and then kind of moving forward and bringing together volunteer energy to do that. But it kind of got to a point where they said, you know what, we really need to expand the voices that we're hearing from in the community and really hear from a broader constituency of folks in town. And so they actually came to VCRD to ask for our facilitative support. We work with communities that come to us that are looking for help with engagement, that are kind of ready to bring folks together to engage. And ultimately our board makes decisions around where we work next. And so Londonderry was, first of all, ready to engage today. They kind of have this team geared up, but also want to hear more broadly from the community. They were also open to having a virtual conversation. This is typically we have hundreds of people in one room together having this conversation, and this is the first time we'll be doing this virtually, and we're building in some tools to make sure that we're hearing from those voices. So we only work where we're invited, though, and so ultimately the select board did write a letter of invitation to our board that the board accepted and decided to kick things off in Londonderry.
What have you been hearing on these topics of economic development and youth and childcare and so forth in other community visits that you've done in towns like Londonderry, small rural communities? Are there any themes that you've been hearing fairly consistently as you've gone through these visits?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, every community is different. However, we do see a lot of these very same themes as we're working with towns, especially small communities. Certainly around economic development and jobs. Lately, a lot of communities are thinking about how to boost local business and ultimately coming to a place of deciding actually to work on infrastructure, like water and sewer infrastructure. It's interesting that people will come into the room ready to say, we need economic development or we need to support our businesses, but walk out of the room having voted on water sewer infrastructure, because the kind of wisdom, collective wisdom of the room says, well, we can't address those issues until we address this first. We have communities like up in Montgomery. That was a conversation there where they said, we really need to address that, as well as the kind of walkability of our downtown, our village center. And they recently passed a bond vote and are working with USDA Rural Development and others to move forward on those projects. Childcare has been a huge theme that we've seen around the state. And of course, with the pandemic now more than ever, and certainly people tying that idea both to kind of supporting families in the community, but also economic development, right? That people need childcare in order to work. And so that's certainly been a major theme. We've also seen a lot of communities, like there's kind of two different ways communities go. In some towns, they really go more towards that harder, like economic development. We need to work on infrastructure. We need to work on streetscape redevelopment, all important. Some communities go in a different direction and say, what we really need is to bring our community together and strengthen connections and unity in our town. So we've seen a lot of communities set up new recreation programs or start a concert series in their community, or even like in Wallingford, where they brought back a tradition that had kind of fizzled around Wallingford Day, a day in the community to celebrate their town and bring people together. And they brought that back 2 years ago. And of course, this year couldn't meet in person, but took on some really interesting community art projects and ways to connect people even when they couldn't be together. So these are themes we see throughout, but every community approaches it differently. And when you bring people together in the same, I guess, virtual room this time, it really is, it's really neat to see how people kind of come to those conclusions around what do we need for our community today, and what are those first steps that we should take. So it'll be interesting to see where Londonderry lands. I know they've had long time conversations around their main street and looking at their walkability of that kind of main street stretch, but are also interested in thinking about trails and recreation. And I know they've been working on that childcare piece for a long time. So we'll see where they end up.
For those who can't make the forum on February 3rd and have ideas to share, you can submit them via an online survey, bit.ly/Londonderry survey, or by paper of survey at input boxes located at the Londonderry Post Office, the Londonderry Town Office, and the South Londonderry Free Library. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.